opened our store, Sidetrack Bookshop, in June of 2022, so just about a year and a half, 18 months or so ago. And we're in Metro Detroit. We're a general interest bookstore. We sell all new books. We have both children's and adult titles. We're having so much fun. It's definitely the best of all of the careers so far. And I'm not planning on going anywhere for a while.
That's
So that's
awesome.
us.
Well, tell everybody a little bit about so the building is very cool too, because
Yeah.
it's kind of like on a corner a little bit, and it's
Yep.
adjacent to the railroad tracks.
Yeah, so the reason we're called Sidetrack Bookshop is because we are literally the train that runs through downtown Royal Oak, which is a sort of a downtown shopping area, runs right behind our building. And the building, it's about 100 years old, built in the 20s. For a long time, it was a shoe store or something like that. And then in 1975, when she was pregnant with me, my mother opened a plant store in the space. And so I kind of grew up in the space because she had her store there in the 80s. She turned it into a flower shop. And so when we were actually in Florida visiting my parents. My mom has since retired, and they're what we call snowbirds. I'm sure you all Midwestern people are familiar with that term. So when the shutdown happened, we went to Florida for 3 months. We sort of picked up. I was practicing law from Florida remotely, and my kids were in school remotely. And we kind of came up with the idea of opening a bookstore because we were trying to figure out a way to stay in Florida that didn't involve practicing law. But when we got back to Michigan, my son, who was 7 at the time, kind of announced that we couldn't possibly move to Michigan because that would mean leaving his BFF. But we were so far down kind of this rabbit hole and getting all excited about opening a bookstore that we decided to do it in Michigan and here at home. And the tenant that was in our space had just broken their lease and given notice that they were leaving. And so it just was sort of kismet at that point. Like, here's this perfect spot on this really busy corner in this busy, amazing, diverse retail space.
Yeah, I love that story. And just for some additional context, I mean, the Barnes and Noble in Royal Oak closed what, like 5 years ago, or it's been a while.
So my son is 10 now, and I distinctly remember trying to go back to that Barnes and Noble after he was born to return some books that we had received from, and they were closing down and we weren't taking any returns. So I think it's been about 10 years.
Oh, 10 years. Yeah. And
I mean, 10 years now. So maybe 8 years from when we opened. But people have been so glad that there's a bookstore back in downtown Royal Oak. So we've been really lucky from that perspective.
Yeah. And like Royal Oak needed the retail for sure too. So I mean, I definitely think it's very cool that you're there. So
Thank you.
Well, just for some additional context too about our group. So we are a group of independent publishers, and that means everything from indie authors to traditional publishers to hybrid presses, and a little bit of other people mixed in between. Like, for example, Paul is a book designer with us. So really what we were hoping for this evening is just to have some sort of dialogue between publishers and booksellers, because it seems like often there's a middleman in between there. It might be a distributor or, something getting in the way of publishers and booksellers having conversations. So the questions I wrote were kind of in that spirit. And then I'm really excited to see, what everybody else asks for. So, and here I'll do what I said and paste the question in as I'm asking it. But so if everyone wants to take a look at their chat. So my first question is, what factors do you consider when you're selecting titles to feature in your bookstore? And like, does that change based upon what genre you're talking about?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me is, what I've experienced in the first year and a half of doing this is just this, fire hydrant of information and unbelievable, wealth of titles and diversity in titles and publishers and presses, and there's just so much out there. And so for me, the biggest thing is that a title actually catches my attention. and how does that happen? And I think usually the thing that cuts through the noise the most is, a recommendation from a rep. Maybe somebody has, put an arc or a galley in our hands or my hands or one of my booksellers' hands. Maybe it's a customer special order that, a customer's like, I heard about this book and I really want to read it. And I take a look at it. I'm like, oh, that sounds really interesting to me too. Sometimes it's a nudge from a publisher. And then occasionally like a request for an author, too. Something, like I said, that kind of cuts through the noise. I think that those factors are more important, in the, in terms of genre, in the genres that I don't read. I'm a big fiction reader. And so, something's coming out I'm more of a, lit fiction or women's fiction or whatever. If there's a new fantasy title or, science fiction or nonfiction, or something in there, that's just sort of outside of my wheelhouse, those factors become even more important. And I think also for the small and independent publishing, small presses and independent publishers, those things become more important too.
Yeah, that makes me think, we ran into each other at the Heartland Fall Forum this
Yeah.
past fall. And one of the things that you mentioned to me, which I found so enlightening, you just said it really helps to have a review copy. And, just understanding the sheer amount of books that are coming out and everything,
Yeah.
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 Alrighty, so here, let me get my question number 2 here. So speaking of your customers and your readers and your audience, how do you stay attuned to what they want, and how do you keep track of what your customer wants?
I try to pay attention to what's selling. And kind of stay on top of that. Both in our store, certainly, but then also paying attention to, we've subscribed, there's Ada Weiss, which is the electronic catalog of all of the, or the electronic database of all of the catalogs from all of these different publishers. We've subscribed to their analytics program, which will show me what's selling in other bookstores too. So we try to tune into that. That also provides, if it's something that's new or unfamiliar to me, if you as the publisher or the press can provide comps in the Ada Weiss catalog, I'd love to see those. That's really helpful. And then again, I mentioned on the other question about customer special orders. I really like to see those. I think that really helps. I do try to stay tuned into like social media and different industry media too, whether it's Publishers Weekly or different emails that come and newsletters and things like that. Bestseller lists.
Yeah, and so when you keep an eye on the sales within your store, are you looking on a weekly basis or monthly, or how often are you looking at that? And then are you looking at titles or genres, or like how big is the lens that you're looking?
We cut it in a lot of different ways. I look at the sales in our store every day. Just the nature of how our inventory is set up. We have a giant basement. It's almost as big as our sales floor. So we keep a lot of stock down there. So I look at what's the individual titles that have sold every day just to make sure that I haven't run out of something on the floor that's actually in the basement. So on a real micro level, I'm looking at that every day. And then I look every week to see, what has sold that week and what our big sellers have been. And then we're looking on a monthly basis and a seasonal basis or maybe quarterly basis at genres and turns and how frequently different sections are selling within the store.
Cool. Okay, and then can you share any memorable experiences about a particular title that did really well and you weren't expecting it to, or it came out of the blue, or anything like that?
Yeah, I think, and I'm glad that this question is on here because I really wanted a chance to talk about this. So, one of the titles that has been one of our best-selling fiction books in both years that we've been open. I mean, the first, 2022 was only about 6 months. Was "Tell Me One Thing" by Carrie Schlottman from Regal House Publishing. So, independent press, smaller, independent publisher, smaller press. And the way we found that title is Regal House approached us to ask us to host Carrie in the store to do what they called like a hometown launch for her book. She grew up downriver, so not in Royal Oak by any stretch, probably about, 30 minutes away, 45 minutes away from us. But she now lives out of state, and she wanted to come home to do a launch event for her book. And we agreed to do it. And one of our, we decided with Regal House to do it as like an in conversation with one of our booksellers. And so Megan read the book first. Megan's one of our booksellers, one of our managers, and she loved it. And so that was number one. She read the book and she loved. I mean, I guess number one is that they approached us, right, and told us about this book, and it was intriguing enough to Megan that she wanted to read it. So she reads it. She loves it. The event went brilliantly. Great turnout. Carrie and Regal House had both done a lot of work to publish the event or publicize the event. And so we had a ton of people there. And then because Megan loved it so much, she has been talking it up to customers and talking it up within the store. So a bunch of us ended up reading it and we all loved it. And then we ended up doing it as a book club. When we do we do 2 monthly book clubs every month. So that was, another 20 customers that read it, all of whom loved it. And so it's just kind of gone from there, where the word of mouth has spread, and it has just been a fantastic title for us. And I think it was really, everybody was doing something to work together to make this a really great experience for everybody.
Yeah, that's cool.
It's a great book. You should read it.
Okay. And then, all right. So now obviously we know a lot of people have shifted towards buying books online. What do you think that does to the physical bookstores, or like what does that do to the role of the physical bookstore now with the rise of online shopping?
Yeah, I don't know how competent I am to answer this one just because we are so new. I haven't, my experience in the shift is as a consumer as opposed to a bookseller, right? Because we didn't open until June of 2022, which was kind of, I mean, we certainly, so I was planning the bookstore for maybe, I don't know, a year before that, maybe not even like 6 months, right? Because it was winter, it was holiday time when we came up with this idea. But we had seen, like, I remember in sort of the spring of 2020, ordering, I was the white girl who ordered a bunch of authors from a Black-owned bookstore from Source Booksellers in the wake of George Floyd. And remember seeing all of that, kind of fall out, and knowing that they were, completely overwhelmed with those orders. And then also hearing in that context, again, as a consumer, about all of these bookstores, pivoting to do curbside delivery, as with everybody else, right? Like every industry was trying to figure out how to navigate the shutdown, or the shutdowns or whatever. So when we're coming into it, we're new and we're like, okay, so how are we going to do this? So we, got a platform on bookshop.org because that seemed like a good idea. And we have a web store through Indie Commerce because that seemed like a good idea. And we've opened up all of our, we have all the different social media platforms. So right now, I think what we're trying to do is just stay flexible, and figure out what works for us.
So since you're also selling online, can you give a percentage of like what is your online sales out of your total sales?
You know what? I don't have those numbers right at my fingertips.
Okay,
I'm
just
always,
curious.
yeah, no, the author of Tell Me One Thing is Carrie Schlottman. I'll put it in the chat. The It's definitely on my to-do list to get better at all of the financial stuff and figure out what percentages of what. I'm just not there yet.
Fair enough. Yeah, you're talking to a bunch of words people here. That's fine.
Right? Like math? What, you want me to do math and bookkeeping?
Yeah,
This is why I didn't go to medical school.
right. Okay, so our next question, can you talk a little bit about striking the balance between featuring established authors and the bestsellers versus, something that you might know about that you want to introduce to your customers?
I think because we're so new right now, we're sort of trying to do everything. In terms of events, we're not big enough yet. We're too new to get any kind of like big name, you know, big traditionally published authors. Like that's just not going to happen. We, I really love to do events with local authors. They, the local authors, and we've been, I mean, we're so rich in literary folks where we are. I've been amazed at how many authors, whether they're independently published or self-pubbed or traditionally published, have just walked into our store and introduced themselves. It's been amazing, and I just feel so lucky to have been in the middle of that.
That's cool. So that kind of leads into my next question here. How big of a factor is it that someone is local or is involved in the local community in you selecting them to be in your store?
I think it's huge. Because somebody that's local already has their own networks that they can pull on to bring those folks in, and so it's really a win-win for us, right? Like, because we're building our network and that author is trying to build their network, and so we can both bring those different folks together, and it can kind of synergize.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned the one example of the publisher who reached out with wanting to bring this author back to her hometown, but are there any other memorable instances of collaborating with publishers in unique ways to market titles?
um I mean, any of our events, I think when the publisher gets involved, I think it helps and can really make a huge difference. I feel like the more people that are pulling for a title, or the more channels that you're pulling for a title, I think the better it can go. We're
Hmm.
better together, and it just the more you can maximize or you know increase the bandwidth of something,
Right.
I think the better off we all are.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking about when you mentioned that, the author was promoting the event, the publisher was promoting the event, and there you go, it was successful. Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean, it needs more than one person talking about it for sure.
yeah. Well, and it's like if you only if it's just me on my channels saying, hey, we're doing an event, I'm only going to get X number of eyes on that event. But I feel like if then the author has doing the same thing, then it's almost exponential. When you get all of these different, the more people you have coming in, the more it multiplies.
Hmm. Okay. Now, what about you operating as an independent bookseller versus competing against chain retailers? Are there any challenges that come to mind, or is that sort of kind of a moot point these days because it seems like the chains are going out of business too, or any thoughts on that?
I guess that's true. I don't know. I think it just comes down to space and money, right? And like square footage on the sales floor. Um, like it's just different ways of saying money, right? Like whether it's, do I have the square footage? Do I have the dollars to put into the inventory? Do I have the time to put into the marketing? And all of that comes down to like, how are you going to split it up? And how are you going to prioritize? And where do those dollars go? And I haven't figured out how to do all of that yet by any stretch. Like there's so many more I mean, we get requests every week from usually, self-published authors and folks that are local. And I want to bring all of those books in. But I don't have the shelf space. So how do we figure out which ones to do and which ones not to do? And I don't have any good answers for that yet. We're still trying to figure that out as we go. I wish I had 3 times the space, but I can't afford that yet.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's interesting. Like just thinking of the square footage and the space you have available, have you I mean, are book selling associations a resource for that, or are you just kind of figuring it out as you go? Or
A resource for what? Getting
I
me
mean,
more
like figuring
space?
out how to lay out the store and how to figure out how to
Hmm.
maximize your square footage and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, we've certainly taken advantage, or I've tried to take advantage of different resources, whether it's from the American Booksellers Association or some of the regional associations have sort of banded together to do this like professional bookseller school.
Hmm.
And we've taken a bunch of those classes and trying to learn as much as we can about like how to organize the inventory and how to, sort of maximize your dollars and things like that. So we're learning. But it's a process and we're new and there's a
Yeah.
lot on the to-do list. There's
I mean, I
just so
can,
much that I want to do and like it's just a question of having the time in the day too.
yeah. Can you talk a little bit about what kind of social media platforms or digital presence you've leveraged to get in touch with your readers? Or like, how did you even go about the process of, which social media accounts to use or that kind of thing?
So we have Facebook and Instagram, TikTok, and Threads, I think is it.
Threads? Okay, I don't
Thread
even.
Threads is the like Threads is a meta platform, so it's from Mark Zuckerberg. But it is very Twitter-esque. It's
Oh,
sort of where people are fleeing, like it seems like people are fleeing Twitter and going to Threads. It's the
oh
same
wow.
idea in terms of it's much more word-based as opposed to image-based. Um, and it rolled out, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 months ago, I think. Um, and it seems less toxic. I don't know than Twitter.
Yeah, well,
Um,
pretty low
and
bar.
yeah, exactly. Perhaps even more so recently, and I think that's the idea. Like, I think they're just totally capitalizing on that, right? But you know, so when we first started, it was me doing all the social media. And then now that we've been open for a while and we have folks in the store, the youths in my store who are not actually youths, but just young adults who are, sort of more social media natives, have kind of taken over, at least on Instagram. Um, One of my millennial managers has kind of taken over, Facebook to a certain extent because she could schedule stuff there. And then sort of I'm left with they won't touch Threads. They're like, we don't
Oh,
need anything more. So I sort of sporadically post there. And I try to take things that they've done on Instagram or Facebook or whatever and flip those over to the other platforms. So I'm trying to not recreate things and just sort of use the same content in a different way for the different
yeah.
forms.
Well, that's interesting. Once we open up to everybody else, if anyone else is using Threads, I would be interested to hear about that. I feel like there's always some little nugget I learn in these meetings. So thank you. That
There
was
we
this
go.
one for tonight. Um, okay, so I think we got here. Let's see, we got to my last question here. Let me paste it in and then I'll open it up to everybody. But this question has to do with the spirit of publishers working together with you as a bookseller. Do you have any advice for, how publishers or authors who are approaching you can increase the likelihood of, you paying attention, or any advice for successful partnerships?
I think for getting my attention, like I mentioned when we were in Heartland, being able to get a book in my hands and convincing me, giving me a good elevator speech on why I should read it. That's number one. Um, And then from there, I think it really is keeping the lines of communication open. In terms of if we do decide to carry the book or to collaborate on an event or what have you, as I think I've been saying over and over again, like, let's all work on this. I'm too new. I don't have the platform. I'm not literati. I don't have 30,000 followers, right? I'm happy to, move things along to my followers, but that's not going to be enough. And so we all have to kind of work on it. And I think, and from there, it's, sort of helping me to understand your business, and how we can work together so that, we can, I mean, none of us are doing this to make money, right? These are not money making, get rich anytime soon ever,
Well, I
business.
found out that too late, but you're
Yeah.
right.
But that said, it's still, they are businesses, and we're not doing this for free, right? It costs money, and so how can we work together to try to make some money together, right? And how make this profitable for each other. And then from there, sort of keeping that relationship alive. Like, there's nothing that, I would like to learn more. One thing I have learned from Threads, how's this? Is I did not realize um, just how hard it is, or I guess, no, I think I did. I knew that. Let me put it a different way. I I've gotten the impression from, sort of posts on the social media that, as it turns out, Amazon publishing might be one of the ways that people feel like is the way that they are able to independently publish or self-publish and actually make some money. Whereas before I read that, if an author's coming to me and they want me to carry their book that they've self-published and they want me to buy it off of Amazon, it's like this immediate turnoff. I'm not going to get your book from Amazon and carry it in my store.
Well,
But
yeah, I can understand. There's a huge disconnect there because I can understand it from the author's perspective, but I can certainly understand it from your perspective as well. You're not going
yeah,
to order stock from Amazon.
yeah. Well, and that's what I was my point with the Threads thing is I didn't realize, my assumption had been that it was just sort of, Amazon was the easy thing and people didn't realize just how terrible Amazon was, right? And but what I'm hearing is it sounds like, the situations are just horrific everywhere. And Amazon's doing what Amazon does, which is it makes it impossible for you to do things anywhere other than with them. And so it sounds like I have some learning to do there too, but I still have sort of a knee-jerk reaction.
Understandably so.
It is
Okay,
April.
well, um, at this time, I would like to open it up to everybody else. So go ahead and use the raise your hand feature if you want to ask a question or if you want to put something in the chat. I can keep an eye on that.
How do you raise your hand?
Or you can just look. Does somebody have their hand up? Who's got it? No, Lee has his hand up. Okay, I think to raise your hand, click on more, and then reactions. Yeah, and you can do all kinds of look. Okay, all right. Lee, did you have a question?
I did, yeah. So first of all, thanks. This is really interesting, Jenny. I'm curious when you're talking about events being successful for you. Um, it seems to me that there are two points in an author's journey where an event can be successful at a bookstore. The first is their debut book, when they get everybody, every friend they've ever had, and everybody in their town is willing to cross town to go to a bookstore for them. And the second is when they're Jeff Kinney, or they're just they have a huge name and stuff. But for the vast middle of being published, I think that bookstore events can be really challenging to get people to show up. So I'm wondering, are you, when it's just like, hey, I have a new book out. So can you talk a little bit about and I'm hearing that from a lot of my author friends that like, oh, bookstore events are challenging. Even when there's a panel, we had 4 people show up and we had 5 people on the panel. So can you talk a little bit about like what makes an event successful from your point of view? I mean,
Yeah, I
definitely in
think,
the door, but
yeah, and I think you probably have more experience than we do. And I'm glad to hear you say that it's challenging for everybody, because it's certainly, we don't qualify for Jeff Kinney. or anywhere close to that. You know, I'm really excited if I can get the Dogman costume for the next Dogman release. Like, that's gonna be like beyond anything. But no, so you know, I don't know that I have figured out the special sauce for what makes them work for sure. I shouldn't say that. I think a successful event for me is that we, you know, an author is there, we have a good conversation about a title. I mean, sure, I would love it if we have a packed house with standing room only, but that's only happened in a handful of times. And you're absolutely right. It has been, for the most part, with debuts or big events, you know, big things. Like we did a midnight release party for Fourth Wing. And you know, no author for that one, but we definitely had standing room only, and it was a lot of fun. But you know, in terms of what makes it that, you know, successful event, even if it's just, you know, a handful of people come, it's, you know, building that community and having a conversation and having the opportunity to talk about a book, I think is really amazing, and I love that. And I hope that we get to have the opportunity to do more of that. It's just the idea of getting more people involved and getting people in the same space and sharing their love of books and literature, and that's just a lot of fun.
Lee, do you have any thoughts in response?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's always like the upside of it at the events that I've been at. Sorry, I have a book that was published, that I published, and then I have a few that have come out from indie publishers. But the events that I've been at that haven't had great numbers of people show up for, it is a sort of like you're bonding with the store, people that work at the store. You're hoping that they become champions of your book when you're not there. But it is just to, you know, to plan an event and then have so few people show up. So I kind of just think that there's that interesting, and I have this interesting moment just outside IBPA as an author. I have 3 books coming out from 3 different independent publishers this year, but it's books 4, 5, and 6 for me as an author. And I'm like, I'm not doing any bookstore events. I mean, I'm working with my local bookstore to do like a pre-order thing. But it's just, I know I'm not going to get people to cross town for at least 3rd, 4th, or 5th event books. Like it's not going to happen. So not to be a bummer for anybody, but just speaking realistically, I'm not a household name. I'm not Jeff Kinney. They're not, you know, so it's just an interesting kind of inflection. Like I want to work with bookstores, but it's also like, how do I do it in a way that actually helps the bookstore and me?
Yeah. Joni, do you want to go ahead with your question?
Helps if I unmute it now. I just wanted to introduce myself and say hi. I'm Joni and this is Vern, and we're in your neck of woods. We're BHC Press. We're a local traditional publisher, and we're in Livonia.
Okay.
So I am planning to come by your store, and I want to network with you, and I have lots of ideas. I've actually always wanted to own my own bookstore. So like I have all kinds of ideas. I don't know, like to help like for your events, just if you want someone to pick a brain with. I loved what you said about Amazon, and for all the publishers and even for the authors here, we do a lot of author education because what you said is very true. We meet with our authors, we have toolboxes, we have tips, and we tell them, if you want a bookstore to work with you, don't go on your social media and only have tweets about buy my book at Amazon, because they're not going to want to bring you in. You know, you want to be able to support the bookstore, and the bookstore wants to support you. So it's a lot of author education, and that's why our books are available everywhere. We're not Amazon fans. Sorry. So I'm in the same camp with you. I know they're a necessary evil, but there's a lot of things that I don't like that they do. So I think in order for an event to be successful, if publishers and authors can work together, and it's really about the education. But one of the other things is we educate our authors on events. You know, you're a brand new author, you're so excited with your book. and they want to spread themselves really thin. They think they're going to have all these bookstores, in the local area. So we always tell our authors, pick one bookstore and try to funnel everybody in there. Who's your best bet? Who's going to help support you? Who's better for your area? And then blitz it everywhere. We put it out everywhere. And our most successful launches have been when we've done that. So I just kind of wanted to just share our experiences with that and kind of back up what you're saying.
Yeah, and I had written this down when I was sort of thinking, trying to put my thoughts together, is one experience that we had that was kind of a bummer, is that we had agreed with a local author who was with an independent publisher to do a launch event with her. And as far as we knew, it was the only event she was doing. And then about, I don't know, 10 days before our event, we had already started publishing, publicizing and everything. We saw that she was doing another event with another local bookstore that's within 5 miles of us.
Right, and they're your competition.
Yeah, I mean, it's not competition in the sense that, like, we're all friends. Like, we know all the other bookstores. But for somebody like her, it's a debut book. She's she's young. The event was gonna be, like Lee said, like all of her nearest and dearest coming out to celebrate. And they're not gonna come to 2 events within 5 days of each other, within 5 miles of each other. Like, it's just, you're kind of cannibalizing your own stuff. And to Lee's point, it's a lot of work. Even if everybody's all doing their own part, it's still a lot of work. And that was like, oh, that's kind of a bummer. And definitely, like you said, Joni, the other thing that can be really a bummer is even if you've had an event or you're planning an event, and then, or you're carrying the book in your store, and then you're seeing the author, publicizing it. And I have no problem when, authors are like, hey, my book's 10% off at Barnes and Noble this week. Like, great, yes, get those sales, but not every single, post that you make is buy my book from Amazon. Like, no, please don't do that.
Yeah, and then just really quick, the one thing that I wanted to suggest to you that we have a lot of things for authors to bring in is, have you considered doing virtual events for your store? Because those things are getting really hot.
Yeah, we haven't been able to. I would love to do that, but it's on, like that long list I was talking about of like all the things I'd love to do, but I haven't quite figured out how to do yet. In terms of like figuring out what the technical needs are for that, we just haven't been able to pull it together. We'll get there.
It just seems like there's a lot of misconceptions all around, because I was thinking about, from the clueless author's perspective, they think all it takes is to, get this shelf space on the bookstore, and then our book will sell. And like, it's hard for everybody, and like everybody needs to just know that and communicate it more.
Yeah, exactly, Jen. I mean, the communication, I think, is key, because I don't know everything about an author and what they're working on. I can see very clearly as this is their baby and they want to get it out in the world, and I want that too. But I want to be able to listen to them and hear what works for them, and I hope that they would do the same for us.
It's okay.
Okay, Amy, you've had your hand up. I saw your question in the chat. Do you want me to read it, or do you want to expand on it a little bit? You were asking how would a fully self-published author provide books to a bookstore? And here she is. Go ahead, Amy.
Yeah, I mean, as someone who's fully self-published, my book's really only available on Amazon or through my own website. So what options are there for getting into a bookstore? Because I understand you guys don't want to buy it on Amazon.
Yeah.
You don't get the best price. I don't get the best price. So
they just screw everybody. But that's what they do. I think that different bookstores have different policies. I can just tell you kind of what we do. We don't. I think there are some bookstores that have figured out how to do consignment. And I think that can work really well. We just don't have the space for it, and I haven't had the time to figure out a good plan for consignment, so we haven't quite gotten there yet. So that's one option. So right now for us, either we've done a couple of different things. Either one, we get the book from Ingram, which distributes a lot of self-published work, including different I don't know how Amazon works with their publishing, but I know that I have bought books from Ingram that are published through Amazon. Whether it's their different imprints or what, I'm not sure exactly how that works out, that the book is actually available from Ingram, but that certainly has happened. And I know that there are some bookstores who refuse to buy the books from Ingram that are published by Amazon, but we are not those. I'm not going that far. And so there's the consignment, there's getting them from Ingram. And then the third way that we've done it is if we're doing an event, if we've chosen to do an event with an author, then what we'll do is we'll sell the books at the store and then just pay out to the author at the end of the night for the number of books that sell on an agreed upon in advance, split. And I usually try to make this split equivalent to what we would have paid if we had gotten the book from Ingram. So that we talk about, we have like a 42% discount off of the cover price from Ingram. And so that's what I would pay the author, the 60% or whatever. And then we keep the 42%.
Yeah. And so maybe, that could be a topic for future MIPA is, how to do Ingram. Like I have really no idea how to go about that part of it. So that could be a good future MIPA topic.
Okay, well, those people must be just using like Ingram Spark or something. I was thinking of having some sort of lunch and learn about POD files, but yeah, Amy, let me think about that. Good idea.
What's POD? Oh, print on demand.
Print on demand, yeah.
Yeah, because I've published 6 books, but I have no idea. Ingram.
How do you get your books? So you're using one of
Amazon.
the Amazon things?
Yep.
Then you don't know if your books are available from Ingram?
Wouldn't I have had to put them there?
I don't know. I think Amazon does it.
Can anyone speak to that?
I'm looking.
I can comment a little bit. I mean, if you're in Amazon, when we're talking Amazon, I'm assuming you mean KDP.
Yes.
To be clear, Amazon does have its own publishing wing as well. So when we talk published by Amazon, I think, Jenny, what you were referring to is KDP produced books. And if you do the extended distribution, that in theory gets it out into the larger catalogs, but it's at a huge discount. You'll make far less money than you would.
$2.
Yeah, even than the normal. So usually when people are talking about being in the Ingram catalog, it's going through Ingram Spark or Lightning Source or something like that, which is Ingram's version of KDP. So it's a completely different platform. It gets you into that, if you will, that extended network, but at a better margin than Amazon allows.
Well, so Amy, is your book is one of your books Life with a Traumatic Brain Injury?
Yep.
Okay, so I could get that from Ingram, but
Oh,
I
you
only get
can.
a 25% discount off of the retail price and it's not returnable. So to me, those are crappy terms. And
So
I
you
would
would never order
rather,
You would never order that based on those terms?
no. Yeah.
Amy?
and-
Amy, you can also go to Ingram if you go through draft to digital. Their book printing division links to Ingram. So it's DRAFT numeral 2 DIGITAL. Their book publishing division goes through Ingram. So that's another way to get through Ingram. And it's a way to get through Ingram without going through the complex registration process. And it's a little, and I understand that they've made it a little easier for you. They've got templates, they've got instructional videos. That's what I understand anyway. I haven't tried it with them yet, but I just know what they do. So that's another option for you.
Thank you.
All right. So we had a question from Ron in the chat. Ron was wondering, how important are professional reviews in your book selections?
I don't know that I've noticed professional reviews. I do appreciate a professional edit. I think that that makes a big difference. If a local author has brought us a copy of their book to review, and I'm looking at it in my distracted brain, I'm noticing typos, I'm not excited about it.
Yeah. So like you mentioned that you use Edelweiss to check for new material and stuff like that. I mean, I think that type of catalog is where if there's like some sort of editorial review within the metadata, it would show up in Edelweiss, correct? But so you're not really concerned with whether books have a review added to them or not?
No, I mean, maybe I'm not understanding what the person who's asking the question means by professional reviews. I'm imagining like a blurb on the cover by some particular person or something like that.
I'm
So
guessing
for
we're talking about like
example,
PW or forward reviews or
yeah,
Flagler
or
Journal.
I was gonna mention the paid service, Clarion. So isn't that who Forward Reviews, that's Clarion is Forward Reviews paid service. And so
Yeah.
they sell this whole service based on you pay this amount and our reviewer will review the book and then they actually add the review to the metadata. Like this is how they sell it to us. Like this is how they make it sound good. So so that's what I was getting at, I guess what the question is to whether you look for books that have reviews or it really doesn't matter, but that's how they sell it. Ron, are you still there? I don't know if you want to chime in on any other angles.
Well, yeah, that's the point, is that very often you have to pay for the professional review. I had a couple of them on my science fiction book, and they were great reviews. They were things which made me happy, and I put them on the as the blurbs in the book. And but I'm just wondering how much somebody who runs a bookstore might actually consider those as useful.
I think it would depend on how it came to me, and whether it came to me. Um, like Jen said, if I ran into it in Edelweiss, then it might be something that is going to allow that title to sort of rise up above all of the other noise. But I don't know, if I'm getting a book and somebody's saying, well, yes, it's a Kirkus starred review or something like that, like that's going to catch my attention a little bit more. But I'm not sure that, Joe Blow, says that this book is great is necessarily going to be any different than anyone else.
Well, I mean, in my case, it was a Kirkus review, and also a review from somebody on the San Francisco newspaper, who kind of made a living doing reviews.
Yeah.
They're kind of out of the ordinary, at least for me.
Yeah, no, and I think that that's right. And so the way that I see the catalog of the books is that I'll get a collection of titles for a particular season of new releases that's like somewhere between 150 to 500 different titles that I'm trying to sort through and filter and get through and to make a determination as to whether we want to carry that title or not. And in each of those entries for a particular title, there's lots of different data that I can consider. There's one that's the markups, which are the comments from the rep. And then there's another that's a summary of the book, and that's going to be longer. And then there's another section of reviews. And so the first thing that I'm probably going to look up is the cover. And then the markups from the rep, because they're quick and fast. Then if that is enough to this sounds sort of interesting, then I'm going to probably look at the summary and decide if it's something I want to look. But honestly, the reviews tab is probably the last thing I see, if I even bother with it.
That's interesting.
But on the other hand, I'm sorry, If something does get a review in Kirkus or a starred review in Kirkus or any of the other ones, chances are the rep's going to move that into their markups. Because a lot of times the markups are the things that are going to be like, this is why you want to buy this title. And so maybe one of those, bullet points is a really quick synopsis of the title, but then the other ones are going to be the other selling points. And if it's something, from, New York Times bestselling author or Kirkus starred review or, whatever those really top level selling points are going to be is what's going to come to my attention.
So that concept of markups within Edelweiss was somewhat new to me. We had a session a few months ago with someone from Edelweiss kind of came in and explained their cataloging system and everything. So, but I like in Ron's case, I think, well, the book he was referencing, he's self-published, so it's not necessarily represented by a distributor, and there's not someone doing like markups or whatever.
Right. So that's the next step, right? Is even getting into that catalog in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, well, that's something we've been kicking around on the board because like if MIPA can somehow curate like a community page within Edelweiss and then that can be part of our catalog or something. That's what we've been thinking about
Or
that
a
a little bit.
catalog itself.
Yeah. Well, and we have been shopping around that catalog at the Heartland Fall Forum every year, and we have a digital version of it, but it almost seems like having the Edelweiss version is like the next step with like, clickable things and everything.
Yeah, and I don't know how that works. I mean,
Mm-mm.
I have an appointment this week with my rep from IPS, from England Publishing Services. And so, anything that's distributed by them is going to be in their catalog. But I don't know how that all happens.
So what is that? It's just a sales call where they tell you about the new titles they have coming out? Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is what kills me. Like this is what the smaller publishers and the indie authors, like we need that kind of sales force behind us. Like that's what a lot of us don't have.
Yeah. Because I think it's huge. I mean, that's where at least for me, as somebody who's so brand new at this, I don't have the connections, I don't know all of the small presses.
Right.
You
Well, yeah,
know?
you need to know where to start too. You need to know where you can trust.
Yes.
Yeah, Lee, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
I think I would be better at that at this point. Sorry, I didn't mean to stop the conversation. I just wanted to say, oh, when there's a natural pause, I had a question. I was curious about co-op. So, and if you all do it, because, and just to explain to people, that's when a publisher pays a bookstore for sort of space where the book can be like shelved face out. Like it sometimes famously was like the Barnes and Noble table at the front, where the books were laid out as if they were an editorial selection, but they were not indeed. They were actually, a publisher was paying for that table and the space there, and that generated a lot of sales, which is why it happened. And then pretty interestingly, Barnes and Noble said that they were going to discontinue the process, that practice. I don't know if they have, but I'm wondering, as an indie bookstore, is that something you've looked at? And is that maybe an opportunity for partnership with indie publishers?
So there are a couple of different ways that different publishers do co-op, as I understand it at this point. I feel like co-op is like 400 level book selling, and we're still very much taking those intro classes. We're in the survey classes right now. But maybe it's graduate level, I don't know. But so what we're doing right now is with some of the big publishers, they have like sort of this, well, let me back up. The way they've explained it to me is that co-op comes out of the historical practice of reimbursing booksellers for publicizing a title that is probably going to be publicized to people or to customers who might not actually buy the book from me. So for example, let's say that I, Jenny Kearney, put an ad in the Detroit Free Press because I'm super excited about this book that's coming out next week. But because I'm publicizing in the Detroit Free Press, that's going out to millions of customers. And so probably the publisher, Harper is going to get more business out of that than I would, because all of those people are seeing the ad, and they're going to, buy the book from their local bookstore and not necessarily from me. And so it's the publisher's way of like sort of reimbursing us for that kind of advertisement. Then there is also the display co-op, which is I think what you're talking about, Lee, which is, get us some reimbursement for giving some prime rentals or rent space for the prime display space for a particular title. So we have not really done any display co-op. There have been opportunities, but the display co-op that's still out there requires, the returning of pictures and things like that to show that we've done the display. And I just, like I said, that's 400 level. I have not figured out a system that would make that, sort of worthwhile at this point. Then there's also the co-op where the publisher says, if you buy 10 copies of this book, we're going to give you $25 back or whatever in credit to your account. That's kind of another kind of display co-op that doesn't involve me doing additional work other than bringing in the 6 copies. And then, the advantage, I think, to the publisher is that if I have 6 copies or 10 copies or however many, I'm going to work a little bit harder to sell those. So I don't have to return them and go through that work. So probably I'm going to give it more, face out kind of display and that sort of thing.
Well, I have to interject here. I feel like literally every publisher could have the same horror story that I'm about to tell. But if you have a title that's print on demand and you have an overzealous author who's scheduling a signing and talks the bookseller into ordering like 50 copies or whatever, and then 45 of them, and then the author assumes they're naive, they have the best of intentions, but they assume that that bookseller is going to keep all 50 copies and diligently sell them over their lifetime or whatever, but like that is not the case. So then you end up with like 45 returns or whatever, and then suddenly that title is in the red with Ingram.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
I
mean,
made that mistake too. When we first started and we were like doing some events, and I'm like, I don't know how this works. Author, how many people do you think are going to come to your event? And they immediately all said 50. And so I promptly ordered 50 copies of all of these books. And I was like, oh my God, what are we going to do with all of these?
Or something crazier, like they say 300 and
Yeah. I did not do that. I don't have the money to buy 300.
Yeah.
I did bring in like 45 or 50 copies of a non-returnable title to Ingram.
Oh wow.
And that author continues to post to ask. The author told me, they're like, oh, we're gonna send everything to you. And every time the author posts something, it's sending people to Amazon.
Oh no.
Yeah, and that didn't make me happy.
Jeez.
All right, any other questions here? It seems like we're winding down a little bit. Nancy, I see you've got your hand up.
Yes, I'm curious about, like with, I think you said you partnered up with bookshop.org. And so if me as a customer buys a book on bookshop.org, and I've got your store logged, do you see that order come through? Do you pay attention to the titles I order as just an average person?
Yeah.
You look at that data? Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I don't pay as close attention to that as if you ordered it through my web commerce, like my store e-commerce, but I definitely see the titles and I'm looking at those too, for sure.
Okay. And so your e-commerce site, is that like where I could order anything through there? Because I get confused and it's like, I never know where to order something.
I know. Sidetrackbooks.com is my website. Bookshop.org is bookshop.org.
Okay. So if I go through yours and find a book, put it in a cart and pay for it.
Yes.
Then you're going to physically get the book and mail it to me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas if you do it through Bookshop, Ingram will physically have the book and send it to you, but then send me a commission.
A little, yeah.
Okay. Tish. It's fine. I'm thrilled. It's free money. I'm not doing anything with that. So I am not complaining. That's the best deal ever.
Any other questions?
I guess one question I'll throw out there. I'll just jump in. I can't find the hand button either. So when you deal with returns, Jenny, what do they actually cost you? I mean, are you paying for shipping?
Yeah, just the price of shipping back.
Okay. So to say, I mean, because this is, returns are obviously, it's a contentious issue within the publishing community because
I bet.
publishers hate returns.
I'm sure.
But of course, no bookstore is going to carry anything speculatively unless they can return it. So
Yeah.
it's kind of that thing. But
Yeah,
yeah,
it's
I've always
tricky. I mean, and
wondered.
it's so, it's such a strange practice.
It's the only retail channel that has something
Yeah.
like that.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
No,
So
and
I'm
I've,
grateful for it. It's smoothed out a lot of my errors in the last 18 months.
right. No, and I've always wondered what the actual, I guess, burden is to bookstores. So it's the shipping and then of course the administrative.
Yes, which is not insignificant.
I can imagine.
Yeah, I mean, between, the bookkeeping and keeping track of it, and also trying to figure out which titles that you can return. I mean, in terms of, has the book been out 90 days? Is it still in print? Whatever rules that particular publisher has for returning it. And then keeping track, it's just sort of the administrative, like, when did we send this back? Have we gotten the credit? Have we not? That kind of stuff. And then the time it takes to pack it up and, negotiate with our UPS driver who has lots of opinions about when he will and will not take our boxes.
Well, you're in a crazy location too with the traffic there. So
Well, I was
you,
just going to say on the flip side, the interesting thing for publishers is that, if a book is returned, depending on who's handling the distribution, if it's going through like Ingram or something, you have to decide if you want to actually receive that return or if you want them to pulp it. And if you want to receive it, you have to now, as a publisher, you now have to pay for, say, Ingram to ship it to you. So you paid for the printing, the processing, and now the return shoe. So basically you're getting a book back that is in whatever condition it's in that may or may not be sellable. And you're paying certainly less than retail for your own book, but more than wholesale for your own book. And it's kind of,
Well, and then what about like remainders? Like in my imaginary world, every book that I send back gets sold again by somebody who's selling remainders. I recognize that that's kind of silly and perhaps Pollyanna-ish, but is that not really happening at all?
I think for big publishers, they're often pulped.
well, I can chime in a little bit. Like what Paul is saying is definitely what happens with print on demand titles through Ingram. And I've run into publishers who they always have that pulp option selected because in the long run, it's cheaper to just pulp them than have to pay for the return fee or whatever. But in the case, so my company was using IPG as our distributor, and let's say, and Jenny has gotten our titles, I think, through, I mean, you have gotten some from me, which I wasn't supposed to do, but and so like if Jenny decides to return some of ours, it would, like, in theory, IPG, if they're not damaged or anything, they would just fold them back into the inventory and send them out again. And it would be, so for remaindering though, that would be probably up to the publisher as to whether they still want to put money into that backlist to keep it going. It's not really up to the distributor.
I gotcha.
And it so much depends on the kind of book, a black and white novel. Paperback, probably better to pulp it, a full color cookbook or, some sort of photo essay. That's an expensive book and, you're going to want it back.
Well, on that same topic, I was curious. So like Jenny, if you get a book from IPG, do they give you a certain return window or is it like, as long as you have an account with them, you can return it at any time?
They all have their own different rules. And I don't know, off the top of my head remember the IPG rules. But like for some of them, or I get most of them, as long as the title is still in print, you can return it. Because that's sometimes a question, like, has it gone out of print? In which case they won't give us credit for it if we send them back. And so why spend the money on sending it back?
Right.
For the new releases, for most of them, it has to have been out for 90 days before they'll accept it back for credit.
No, I didn't know that either. That's interesting.
Yeah.
That's for any new releases or just a certain type of like top shelf new releases?
No. My understanding, I think, again, I'm new at this and it's a lot of information that I'm not sure I always have on the top of my mind. My understanding is that if it's a new release, it has to have been out for 90 days.
Okay.
before they'll accept it back. And then for Ingram, we pay a restocking fee, that, is, so we don't just get back our, you only get the discount, you only get back the, and it's only credit on your account. Nobody's giving us cash back. So like, that one author that I talked about that ended up doing the event, at another store 5 miles away, I've got, another one where I was like, sure, she's going to have all these people. So I've got 40 copies of her book. 10 of them sold, and it was from a tiny publisher that we've never used again. And I don't know that we're going to use them in the future. And so that credit's not doing me any good.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's most.
Well, and I almost have to laugh. I'm sorry, you and I left off something where you had extra stock of one of my books and was asking me if that came from me or IPG. And I'm sorry, my response to you was, does this mean I owe you money? So it's just bad from any end. I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
I'll settle up with you if I owe you money, and I'll
Oh
take those
no,
books
you did
back.
not owe me money.
No,
It's
but I was
never
just
gonna be out.
thinking, like, how horrible this is in the life cycle of a book. Like, I've paid to print it, I've used a distributor, I've gone out of my way to get it with you, and now I have to buy it back from you.
No. Well, and I think, that really goes to the point, like, all anybody wants is for the book to sell, right? Like, and we want to get these books into people's hands. And so what can we all do to work and help each other to achieve, because we have the same goals. And so how can we make that happen?
Well, can I ask a related question, Jenny?
Yeah.
So what does sales look like for you? I know it's going to depend a lot on the particular title, but I mean, is a good book 5, 10, 20, 100?
Yes, all of those numbers.
Okay.
A good book is one that I sell all of the ones that I buy. That's a good book. And it's just such a guessing game. It feels like I'm playing the lottery sometimes. I've gotten smarter about it. I had one of my independent reps, so he's, sort of represents a bunch of smaller lines, but not super tiny, like Source Books and Sleeping Bear, and a couple of those other ones that are sort of mid-sized or whatever, has been in book selling for a really long time. And he was one of the first reps that I talked to for an appointment. And I was making these big orders. I'm like, yes, I need 10 of those books. It's such a fabulous book. He's like, no. We don't want to have to do returns. Let's just start with 2.
Oh.
2? That's crazy. He's like, no, really, just order 2. I'm like, okay, fine. And that was very good advice that I did not always follow, that I'm trying to follow a lot more now.